We recently had the opportunity to sit down with world-renowned waterfowl photographer Gary Kramer and hear what he had to say about his latest book, Waterfowl of the World. How long did it take you to put this project together, and how many countries did you go to?
Well, the overall project was nearly 4 years in the making. I started in the fall of 17, and then over the next 3.5, nearly 4 years, I went to 40 different foreign countries. Sometimes I was going to one foreign country every month in the year.
Then came the time to pull the trigger and really get going. Did it ever seem like it was too much to bite off, or did you feel confident all the way through the process that you
Well, I mean, I felt relatively confident through most of the process. But of course, along the way, you know, when you have a few disappointments or some travel doesn't go right or the weather's horrible, then you kind of go, what did I get myself into? And then you kind of doubt it. But I think that I didn't let that happen too often. I kind of just powered ahead and said, okay, I got this done, then we'll go to the next thing and go to the next thing, and kind of, you know, it's the ring, you know, the golden ring at the end of the ride that kind of makes it all work for me.
Yeah.
So that's how I looked at it.
What were your biggest challenges along the way?
Well, you know, the thing is, you know, from a biological perspective, you know, some of these birds are found in very, very difficult to reach places, and there's not a lot of them. So, I mean, some of the easiest ones, for instance, were there's a bird, and you'll see it in the book, called an Andaman teal, found only in the Andaman Islands, which is in the Sea of Bengal. You have to fly to India, and then by the time you get there, I put in about 8,000 air miles. It's closer to Thailand than it is to India. And I got there, and there's only supposed to be about 1,000 birds in the world. So this is this epic trip, which I went on. I'd never seen the bird before. The guide that I hired, I'd never met this guy before. I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't know what the weather was like, and I figured it'd be really, really dicey. So I did the trip, got off the airplane into this oppressive heat, because it's hot that time of year, and really all year. Got there, met the guy, drove about a half hour through traffic, cars bellowing black smoke, got to a wetland, and I said, you know, what are the chances of seeing this bird? And he goes, well, look over there. And there were 400 of them. So almost nearly 50% of the world's population was on this nearly urban wetland near the town of Port Blair, which is the capital of the Andaman Islands. So there were those challenges that ended up working out. And then the other end of the spectrum was there were birds like the Salvatore's teal. And the Salvatore's teal is found only in the mountains of New Guinea. When I looked on the internet doing the research for this thing, I could not find a single photo that I would call professional. I mean, there was stuff taken through a spotting scope, you know, like a digiscope, and there were photos that were taken and then heavily cropped, but there was nothing really, you know, amazing. So went to New Guinea, epic voyage again, went to Australia first, then New Guinea, then you have to fly up into the mountains, and they're a species you find in the streams, in the riverine areas. And as soon as I got there, we found birds relatively quick, but you would step out of the car, and 100 yards away they'd fly. They were the wariest things I've ever seen, and the reason is in New Guinea, everybody has a gun, and they're shooting birds of paradise basically for their plumes, and if there's something they can eat, they shoot it. So these birds are disturbed a lot. Plus, there's not very many of them. They never flock, always in pairs and small groups. And it ended up that I spent 60 hours over 6 days sitting in blinds, had to hack through the jungle oftentimes to get to the edge of the river, set up the blind, and I got 5 minutes of photography. In 60 full hours of sitting in blinds in the middle of the end of the earth, wow. But finally got the shot. So there's those that are super difficult, but then you finally, you know, realize them. So there was challenges like that, you know, all along the way, really.
So that was the toughest. What was the easiest bird to photograph?
Well, you know, the easy ones are here. I mean, I live here in the Central Valley of California, and I have, you know, half a dozen both state and federal wildlife areas close by, you know, some are within 10 minutes, and I can go photograph. So, you know, pintails are real widespread around the world, but I have, you know, huge populations here. So things like pintails were, you know, probably among the easiest that I got, or had, you know, a variety to get. Snow geese, there's a ton of them here. A lot of white-fronted geese, so it kind of depends upon where you're at.
Okay, what was the toughest one in North America to get?
For me, the ones I had to travel the furthest to get were like king eiders and Steller's eiders and spectacled eiders, which I went to barrel. So that required a long trip. Once you got there, it was relatively easy to get the photos. But the hardest one to get really good photos for me was a white-winged scoter. And it's a sea duck you find on both coasts. There's not many places where they're real plentiful. They typically feed offshore. But I did find a place in Washington State, kind of up north.
Of all the birds you photographed, which one was the most memorable?
Probably for me, is the most memorable of the bunch, and there's 167 in the world. The Madagascar pochard is a diving duck similar to the same family as a redhead or the canvasback. And it was a bird that was thought extinct for 15 years. And in 2006, there were some researchers in the remote mountains of Madagascar that came across this lake. They were actually looking for an endangered raptor. And they came across this lake, and they saw these birds on this lake and go, God, these birds they kind of look like these birds that are extinct. So they did some further research or investigation. They determined that they had found 13 of the remaining birds in the world of the Madagascar pochard. And then eventually they found a few more. But this particular bird was restricted to a single lake in the mountains of Madagascar. So I got to get it, right? The rarest duck in the world. It took me 6 days to get to that lake. 3 days of flying. I left in the evening, so I counted that day. Flew to Europe, then flew to Ethiopia, and then flew to the capital of Madagascar. The first day was 10 hours in a vehicle on pavement that was mostly potholes. The second day was 10 hours on dirt road, and the third day, the last 4 hours, the last 40 miles took 4 hours. It was the worst dirt road I've ever seen. We got stuck going, got to the lake, hiked a half hour down the lake, got into a yellow canoe that there's some researchers have a station there now, a research station. And that canoe had been used to census what few birds were there. Got in the canoe and I got my shot in the first 5 minutes. So to me, that was probably the most challenging of the bunch as far as just the logistics of getting there. The fact that when I was there was probably only about 50 birds in the world on that, and they were all on one lake. Now there's only about 75, and they've started a captive breeding program, and they're trying to increase these to other areas. But when a bird's that rare, and when you go and there's 50 in the world in one place at the end of the earth, so when I got those images and looked at them, I go, well, that was the challenge that I met. So for me, that was probably the most satisfying, actually.
Yeah, gosh, great story. You have 1,299 photos in this book. I think every one of them is spectacular. Do you have a favorite photo that stands out in your mind?
It's hard to do. I probably honestly don't have a single favorite. I mean, there's some that I really, really enjoy and that I could probably look at, and glance at and say, I don't know how I got that, and then really happy about it. But it's hard to say. Those pictures of the Madagascar pochard, I have to say, I got some flying shots there, and you just don't see many. There aren't many pictures of that duck to begin with, let alone flying. So I'd say that. I have some really, really nice pictures of red-crested pochards, which is a cool duck that I photographed in Morocco. So, there's just a lot. It's hard to pick them. There's too many.
Are there any places, now that the book is done, that you would want to go back to and get different photos of or better photos of?
Yeah, I think there's a few places. I mean, the one that stands out is one of the ones that I did not get was the Steniger scoter. And the Stenigers, or Siberian scoter, the white-winged scoter that we have on the West Coast, for instance, or in the United States, they split that bird out and made it a full species in January of 19, right in the middle of this. So as a result of that, it forced me to get another species. The thing is that they breed in Mongolia, and they winter on the coast of northern Japan and China. So I had a trip to Mongolia planned. I had deposit money down. I had a guide. I had the whole thing. COVID hit, no way to go. Tried to get a special permit, impossible. Then I tried to get a special permit to go to Japan to photograph them during COVID, and I couldn't get that either. So really, that's one that even though this book is done, and even though there are photos in the book of that species from somebody else, which is a very, very few. There's just a handful like that. I'd love to go back and be able to get that bird and add it to my list.
You know, again, looking through this book, and I think every single photo that that you've taken is just phenomenal. A Gary Kramer photo to me is when you see a bird on the water. There's plenty of foreground in that water. Good clean water, obviously. Not captive birds, which is another thing. How you travel the world and got these things in their wild habitat. But when birds are flying, you always have perfect lighting. The same with on the water. There's always some habitat in the background. When you go to a place, when you committed to write to put together this book, you didn't have the luxury of timing it with perfect weather. So you get to a place, no matter it is where you're shooting, what is it you're looking for to compose the shots that have made you, I think, the best waterfowl photographer in the world?
All right, well, thanks for that. But I tell you what, the thing is, it's a real crapshoot when you're doing things like this, because these trips are planned months, weeks, if not months in advance. In the case of this book, outside North America, for instance, I'm going to a place I've never been. I'm going to take a photo of a duck or a goose that I've never seen. I'm hiring a guide that I've never met before. I have no clue what the weather's going to be like, and I really don't even know what the habitat looks like for sure. This wouldn't have been possible 25 years ago, prior to the internet and prior to digital photography. Because the latitude of the low light we can shoot now with high shutter speeds and film speed ISOs is amazing. You couldn't do that 25 years ago. So I had a fair idea, but then I'd get there and I had to just play it by ear. But I think I took the skills that I've learned over the last 45 years on how to get close to ducks. The other issue is that a lot of the guides that I'd hired, whether it be Madagascar, whether it be Romania, whether it be Australia, it doesn't matter where I went, they have a tendency to be people that take birders out. So they would say, well, there's a duck, well, it's 100 yards away. I mean, that does me no good. I got to get 20 or 30 yards away, even with a 600 millimeter lens, to get some of the real tight shots. So I had to get these guys organized on where I was going, but the weather is something that you can't control. So generally I gave enough days to a trip. For instance, if I was going a long distance, I would seldom go for less than 10 days, because I might lose 4 or 5 days to overcast, crummy weather, and then I'd get some good days. So basically it was, using the skills that I've learned for a lot of years to get close. It was being there long enough to get a couple of good days of weather, and then when the good weather comes, you capitalize. I mean, there's not a second. I mean, you don't even take time to take a drink of water. You go photograph till you can't stand it, or till the light gets bad, because the next day may not be that way. So it's just about capitalizing on the moment and doing those kind of things. And then there was a lot of luck involved. I mean, I went to places halfway around the world and had 10 days of gorgeous weather. In times of year, it's not even supposed to be good. So, some of those were pretty nice.
Yeah. So where can people get the signed copies, Waterfowl of the World?
Well, the best way to do it is to go to my website. If you go to my website, which is garykramer.net, you'll come up on the website. You can look at where it says books, click on that, and then the Waterfowl of the World book will come up. There's actually 2 editions of the book that I did. There's a standard edition. This is 540 pages. It's a giant thing. It weighs almost 8 pounds. I also have a limited edition, which I did 250 limited edition, signed and numbered, and they're $250. Leather-like cover. They come in a slipcase, and you can order both of those off the website. So that's the best place to really get it. And those are all signed, autographed by me, so at least you get that signature, if that means anything to you.
Oh, it means a lot. It was an honor to spend some time with Gary and hear what he had to say about this amazing masterpiece. No matter what your level of interest in waterfowling, whether you're a hunter, a bird watcher, or just like seeing beautiful pictures of ducks and geese, this book is for you. Be sure and check it out. And thanks again to Gary Kramer for all the great work he does for waterfowlers around the world.